Welcome, everybody, to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast. I'm Pete Wright. That's Nikki Kinzer.
Hello.
And we're,
Pete Wright.
Yes, we're talking more about work.
Putting my HR hat back on.
I like your HR hat. Goes with everything.
It does, right? It's a great hat.
We're talking about interviews today, right? So we talked last week. Yep. We talked about picking the right career, and now you've picked the career. How do you approach the getting ready for the courting ritual?
That's right. Yeah, it is, right? It really is kind of courting. Well, the way that I have the outline sort of outlined. I'm going to use outline twice. Isn't that like some bad rule that I'm breaking?
I don't know if it's a rule.
Well,
no arrests, all acquittals.
All right, good.
Right.
So I'm going to kind of give some general tips of things to do prior to the actual interview. We're going to talk a little bit about how to practice interviewing, and then some interview tips on, what to do when you're actually in the interview. So it's really, and then also some follow-up. So there's sort of kind of 4 sections to this podcast.
Now, this is how you approach this process when you're sitting down and working with, let's say you've done some coaching with a recent college grad or somebody who's looking at a career change. This is how you deal with this in your coaching environment, right?
Absolutely. And really, it's the advice I would give to a friend, a family member. I mean, just because of I did so many interviews. I was a recruiter for the first probably 4 years of my HR experience. And so interviewing is definitely an expertise of what I did when I was in HR. So, and it has changed some. And so hopefully it hasn't changed so much that I'm giving wrong information here, but I don't think so. It's all good stuff. Some of it's going to be reminders. People are going to think, yeah, I know that. But it always amazed me that even if you know that, people don't always do it. And so if anything, it'll be a good reminder if you're going in for an interview.
Excellent. Well, let's get started. So
right.
I am your potential interviewee. What do I do first?
Well, I think the first thing is to remember you are putting your best self in front of the interviewer. And so you got to play that part. And that's easy to say when people really want a job. They get this interview and they're very excited, and you definitely want to put your best self in front. And the first thing you want to do is you really want to research the company that has called you. If you don't know them very well, definitely get on their website, know the job that you're applying for, have a really good idea of who they are, where they are, how big they are, what they do, and just really know who you're interviewing for. Nothing is worse than interviewing somebody and they're just like, and what company are you? Or, that I don't even know if they do cover letters anymore, but I used to look at cover letters back in the day, and they would have the wrong company on the cover letter because they didn't change it, because it's like
it's like a copy and paste thing, or
totally. So, not good.
That's so awful.
It's awful. Yeah. So definitely know the company you are interviewing for. Write out a list of questions you have about the job. I know last week we talked a lot about company culture, people you're working with. Write out those questions. What do you want to know about the company, the culture, your boss, work style, hours, all of the basic stuff, of course, but get that out on paper so you have it in front of you. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. You want to make sure that you're not just on time for the interview, but that you're about 10 minutes early. And this is really important because I know time management can be very difficult for ADHD. And so if this means that you have to practice a drive-by the day before or a few days before your interview, just to make sure you know exactly how much it's going to, or how much time it's going to take for you to get there, or if you're taking a bus or whatever, then do it, practice it. Just, do what you can, especially if you really care about this job. You don't want to be late. Just don't be late.
Right.
So practice that if you have to. Make sure your phone is turned off, or at least, I say put it away. I don't even think the interviewer should even know you have it.
Oh, that's a really great way to put it, because, a lot of people say, well, it's silent, but you know what? You can hear a vibration. Yeah. If it vibrates, you can hear that stuff, and you notice, and you think that you can't notice. You think it's quiet enough in your briefcase when it's vibrating, but you can notice. Turn it off all the way, power down.
Well, yeah, and if it's in your pocket and you're moving around, I mean, come
Right.
on, it's like it just. I would say you don't even want the interviewer to know you have it, and this includes being in the waiting room. And I don't know if it's just a perception or what, but I've seen this in other tips and tricks with interviewing too. Don't even have it with you when you're in the waiting room. Just read a magazine that they have available, or just sit there quietly, because there's just something about walking out to introduce yourself to someone and they're on their phone, like, because then you feel like you're interrupting them.
Yeah.
And there's just this perception there. So yeah,
Unless you're pretending to be on the phone, you're saying, no, I'm afraid I can't accept your offer of $1 million. No, I have to go. I'm sorry. I have to go. Right.
I'll think about that.
I'll think about that. I'll get back to you in about a half hour. Right.
Yeah. I got to see how this goes.
Yeah, timing is really important on that. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's very true.
Yeah.
And so with that being said, phone is gone. Do you have a pen and kind of like a nice notepad, to jot down notes? Even if you don't have notes, it still looks more professional to look like maybe you would have taken notes,
Right.
And I think it's just one of those things that it can be, you're asking a question and you're listening to what the answer is, and you can just kind of jot it down for your own memory. Again, you're kind of using this tool for yourself too, to remember. But again, you don't necessarily have to use it, but just have it with you. An extra copy of your resume, I think, is really important, especially if there's more than one person interviewing you. They may or may not have a copy, so it might be nice to just have that available to give them that copy if you have it. And you also, I think it helps if you have a copy of your resume for yourself to look at. So when, you're not reading upside down on your resume from the interviewers across the table. So if you have it in front of you, you can kind of follow along, when they're talking about different jobs that you've had. Does that make sense?
Oh, total sense. Or else you could just scoot right up real close to them, next to them, and snuggle a little bit for the resume
as
snuggle.
Your phone is going off.
As your phone's going off while wearing jean shorts. You're cut off.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, and there's the next point, dress the part, right? Know the company you're interviewing for. And even if it is more of a casual environment, I would dress it up a notch. So you don't necessarily, say that you're applying for kind of a casual environment. People do wear jeans. You don't necessarily have to wear a suit, but I do recommend that you look like you care. And in my own personal opinion, and people can, tell me I'm wrong, and that's okay. In my own personal opinion, I wouldn't wear jeans, even if you know that it's okay to wear jeans. Now, I guess if it's a construction job or something like that, it could be a different story. So it may not always be that way. But my personal preference is that you step it up a little bit and almost act like you're going, what would you wear to church, or what would you wear to a wedding, or
yeah, I had somebody tell me they always appreciate when people dress up one notch. Right.
Yeah.
So whatever that is, if it's a jeans culture, wear slacks or khakis and a nice shirt. If if it's slacks or khakis and a nice shirt, put on a blazer. At what point, here in Portland, it takes an awful lot to get you to strap on a tie for men. But that's really what we're talking about. Make sure you're always outdressing the interviewer by just a notch.
Just a notch, because again, it's that best self that you're putting forward, and that first impression is important. And with that being said, make sure your clothes are in good shape, that they're not wrinkled, that there's nothing too distracting. Like if you're a woman, don't wear tons of jewelry, or heavy perfume or cologne.
Please don't wear heavy perfume or cologne. We actually just had an experience with my daughter's teacher, who had to send a note out to parents saying, I am extremely sensitive to smells, and it gives me an allergic headache almost immediately. Please don't come into my classroom or conferences or anything wearing heavy perfume. And that's something I think we have to be sensitive of in this, this day and age. It's just subdued.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Just take that part of it down a notch.
Yeah, crank it down just a notch. Don't
exactly.
Yeah. So,
and this last point is really funny to me. But it is practice your handshake. I know this seems so strange, but as an interviewer, I'm telling you, we notice if you're going to break my hand, and I notice if your handshake is really wimpy. So you have to practice it. And the best advice I can give is, be confident, give them a nice firm handshake, look at them straight in the eye, say, it's a pleasure to meet you, thank you for having me today, and just be that presence, be that strong enough presence that you're confident and you're excited, and smile. Don't do that without the smile. Make sure you smile. But that first impression, that first minute is really important, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion, but practice it with your partner, with your friends, with your mom, your dad, whatever.
That's a tough one for me to imagine somebody saying you don't need to practice your handshake. Of course you need to practice your, you know what I mean? Like, there is a mirroring behavior that many people in their handshakes don't get. Like, you shake hands and you try to mirror the pressure of the person that you're shaking hands with. Right. That's sort of the rule, right? As long as you're not outdoing the person you're shaking hands with, you'll end up at a comfortable, firm squeeze.
Right.
That's what you practice. And it's okay to practice with somebody, with your kids, with your spouse, with your partner, with the friends. It's okay. Or just be aware of it as you're shaking hands. Be constantly aware. Am I going too far? Am I trying to put on airs by squeezing too hard? Right? That doesn't make a good impression.
No. Okay, so practice the interviewing, and this is really that role-playing mock interviews, and this is great because really one of the biggest challenges that I've seen with ADHD is that ruminating effect, where you're really trying to get your point across, so you keep saying the same thing over and over again, but maybe in a different way, or you keep bringing up examples to drive the point home. Pete, you have any idea what I'm talking about here?
No.
No, and you may not, because it's you may not, but I bet you there's a listener that is out there thinking,
yeah,
I'm a little wordy.
I'm a little wordy. I absolutely know what you're talking about. I know you're talking to me. That's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Well, and the other thing that can happen, right, and this is just stuff to be aware of, is that you've gotten distracted in your own answer, and so now you're talking about something completely different than what they were asked, what they asked of you. And so really kind of as a whole, these two things, this ruminating thing that's happening, and then this distraction where you're getting off of the subject completely, you're talking too much. And so it's something you can practice, and that's what I would really suggest, is that practice a mock interview with a friend, your coach, your accountability partner. I'm going to throw that word back in there because I think that's important. But actually practice an interview. Figure out what some likely questions might be, and just practice what your answers are going to be. Making the answers clear, to the point, positive, and get feedback from the person who you're practicing with. Did that go on too long? Did I get my point across? Did you know what I was saying? And have them be honest with you. I think can be really important, but practice it. I mean, that's the best advice that I've gotten for myself and that I can give to people, is just to really get comfortable with answering interview type questions,
Right. And don't fear silence.
Yeah, right. Well, that's an interview trick.
Yeah.
Like, I purposely had silence put into my interviews, because what I found is that when I was silent, they kept talking.
Right. And that's one of those things that I think that's sort of a reverse trick. Like, when you're finished with your point and there is silence, don't worry about it. Like, you're finished. Be finished. Because as soon as you keep talking, you're going to screw something up.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it's okay to be done and ask for the next question, or just look at the interviewer, and then the interviewer knows that it's their cue. The ball's in their court now. And this goes back to reviewing your, when I said have your own resume in front of you, I definitely think you need to know your resume very well. Of course you do, it's your life and everything, but I definitely would just, go through the highlights of each job, and what do you want the interviewer to know, and going back to that strength finder that we talked about last week, is there strengths here that I can highlight from certain jobs, and just really get kind of an idea of what you want, how you want to come across, and practice that with your mock interview. And then I think the last piece with the practice is practice listening. It's really easy to kind of get ahead of ourselves and listen to half of the question and then want to interrupt and just answer it right away. So we want to make sure that the interviewer is done with the question and they're waiting for us to answer, and really practice listening. And then it also gives you kind of a second for you to also kind of think about what you're going to say. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I'm curious to know.
In terms of practice listening, I think that is super important, and I think the trick here is, again, we talked about, if you keep talking, you'll screw something up. Well, that's part of the challenge, because in your head, if you're not truly focused on what the person is saying to you, you will spin off in your head and start answering the question in your head, and that will distract you long enough to miss key points. So I got some advice from an interview coach years and years ago, and it has served me well in just about every facet of my life, which is, you remember, an interview sounds really high pressure, and for many it is, right? Your livelihood, your career may be on the line, but an interview is also just a conversation. When you are just talking with someone, what are you doing? You are listening to them, you're engaging them, you're asking them questions and giving responses to their questions. It's a give and take. And as soon as you just feel like you're being grilled, you will distract yourself, you'll stop listening, you'll stop paying attention, and you'll say something dumb.
Very good point. Yeah,
just
it is.
It's a conversation. Yeah.
Well, and something that we talk about in coaching, it's a dance. It's kind of like that, going back and forth, who's leading and who's following. And it's that dance of, just flow. And so, yeah, definitely. Yeah. Great advice.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, when you're in the actual interview, one of the things that is very common if you go to any kind of site for interview tips, don't be negative about your past employers or your bosses. And it seems so obvious. It seems like that's common sense. But I saw it time and time again where people would talk negative. They probably didn't intend to, but then it kind of just came out, right? With that silence that they couldn't have or whatever. And so really just keeping in mind that you want to stay positive. And even if you had the worst experience ever and your boss was horrible, just don't talk about it. Don't talk about that experience. You can either leave it out or just take the positive out of the experience and maybe not talk about the boss, him or herself or whatever. But we really want to just stick to the facts. And a lot of times that negativity becomes your opinion, and we don't want that. We just want to stay clear from that negativity.
Yeah. There's another thing, not just negativity about your boss, but negativity about your life.
That's so true. Right.
You run into these situations where when you get uncomfortable and maybe you are running a little bit late, maybe you are having a tough time right now, maybe your car was repoed, maybe you're behind due on payments, maybe the phone company was not nice to you in a support call, whatever it is, the person interviewing you does not care.
Right.
And they will care not in your favor as soon as you bring it up.
Right.
They don't know you. You're another face in the crowd. You want to give the absolute best impression. And talking about how your life is falling apart, how your family's crazy, how your in-laws, everybody has terrible in-laws. Those are not stories that are appropriate at all for an interview.
No.
They're just not appropriate.
Absolutely. Stay away from all of that. Stay away. Now, we talked a little bit about this last week, and we'll kind of expand it here, is having those questions ready for you to ask the interviewer. It was kind of homework from above, right? You're doing the research of the company. You've written down some questions and bring those with you to the interview. And, ask about the job. Be curious about the job. Don't just look at the job description and think, okay, that's it. I mean, really ask questions about it. Dig a little deeper, to really see if you're a good fit. And, be a little bit careful of the kinds of questions. I mean, I think you do want to know benefits and salary, but a lot of times that stuff will come out anyway. Like, they'll give that information to you if it's appropriate. You don't want to come across being that it's all about what is in it for me. Like, that's negative. Like if the only questions you're asking is how much are you going to pay me and what are my benefits, that's not good enough. I mean, that's not always going to be a good impression. And the salary thing can definitely be a tricky subject. And I really would follow the lead of the interviewer. They may bring it up to you. If they don't, follow your instinct. Ask them what the next steps are. That could be a way to get kind of a feeling of, are there 2 interviews? Are there 3rd or 4th interviews? What's the process here that I have to go through? And that may clue you in on whether or not it's the time to even talk about salary. If you're going through a 2 or 3 interview process, then I can probably pretty much guarantee the first interview, unless you already know it, is probably not the right time.
Yeah.
But again, most of the time, I really don't think you go into a job not knowing at all what it pays. I mean, I think at some point you'll have some general idea.
Or you wouldn't be interviewing for it. I mean, frankly, if you didn't know at least a range.
Range or something.
There are so many better questions to ask than that. How do you handle it when an employee wants to work from home? How does the company work in small teams? Let's talk about the culture of what it's like to really contribute here. And not get stuck in the it's so hard not to get stuck in the details of salary and benefits, because that's really what you're focused on. But there you can learn so much more about what that will define your experience at the company if you get the job. Mm-hmm. Everything else will come out in the wash.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then as far as follow-up goes, I mean, I always, depending on, I guess, the type of position you're applying for, I worked for a credit union when I did most of my HR experience. And so, and we ranged in positions as far as like the level. But I always think it's nice for you to send a note, whether that is even through an email or a little thank you note. I wouldn't text. I still don't think the texting is really as much, even though it's really popular. I don't think I would do it. I think I would send an email before I would send a text. But just checking in and following up on the process. How are they doing? And eventually you'll know if you got to the next level or not. Mm-hmm. You don't want to bug them. I remember having some people that just called every day, and it's like, okay, enough. We'll get back to you. But a little follow-up, I think, is always positive.
Excellent.
It shows you care, right? I mean, it shows that you really want the job. And if they're on the fence and they don't know who to hire, that could just be the thing that makes them, make the decision. So
yeah. Boy, that's the truth. This is such good material. I hope this is useful for folks, because it's even useful for me, and I'm not interviewing for anything. Again, if you're in this process, if you find that you're going out for interviews now, you're graduating, you need to put on the best face, get a coach. Call Nikki, set up some time to talk, and use her. She is an expert in this. Her background is just perfect. So use Nikki and get yourself in ship shape for your first round of interviews.
And it's a career change too, not only if you just graduated, but if you're looking for a career change, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Good conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining us, for listening to us. Thank you, Nikki, for your wisdom and expertise, as always. And you can find out more about the show at TakeControlOrganizing.com. Just click on podcast. You can learn more about what we're doing here and join the conversation at Facebook.com/TakeControlADHD, Twitter.com/TakeControlADHD, all the various social platforms. We're there. We appreciate your kind comments and words on the iTunes podcast directory. If you have a minute to leave us a kind note there, that really helps other people discover the show. And that's it. Until next week, I'm Pete Wright. That's Nikki Kinzer. This has been Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.